you've got your lint roller, which is
because I have two cats, two white, long-haired cats, and I mainly make my jackets in black.
in Black Melton, which
Yeah,
I had
perfect.
a wire-haired Jack Russell, which also you'd be picking these hairs out of.
So frustrating. It's so frustrating. It adds like 45 minutes onto anything that I want to do with any of my products.
You want a reptile or something that's not.
I just want nothing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love those cats, but I've said to Amy, once they go, we're going to have a cat moratorium, a period of time with no animals. We'll see how long that lasts. Or at least maybe we just get a black cat because we primarily wear black. That'll make sense.
Yes. Yeah. So you and I have come together, Mark, with your idea about how we're at similar stages, but from different backgrounds, doing the same thing, which is starting a clothing brand. My background was self-explanatory. As I went through, you could understand where I got to clothes. Your kind of career has been running a digital marketing agency. Now you're doing clothes. So we need to go back to the beginning as to how that links in with clothes, which is probably more of a personal story. So,
sure.
Why clothes, for one? Why are we at the end point of clothes?
Yeah, I think if we go to the end point and then we can kind of maybe fill it in. But I think that a clothing brand brings all of my interests together, and not just my interests. I think, if you do the Venn diagram of skills, interest, and potentially kind of zeitgeist, and find that crossover. And when you look at what you need to do to bring a clothing brand to life, and I specifically use the word brand rather than business, because the business side is, of course, it's important to have a business out of a brand because it sustains you, it sustains everything that you're trying to do. Money is what is the lifeblood that allows you to do the interesting creative things, but it's that really interests me. It's the brand. And so if you have a clothing brand, you have all the side of things where it needs to have a beautiful website. It needs to have great photography, great videography. It needs to have a world built around the brand. You've got to identify who you're talking to. Then once you've done that, then you can use digital platforms to reach out to them. So I started I started my career as a designer and then went into digital marketing. But it was that creativity and the design side of things that always really sparked my interest. And so there's the design, and of course the design of the clothes and bringing something to life. And then there's using the knowledge that I developed over like 10, 12 years of running my agency to actually project those ideas out there so you can resonate with people.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. There are two things that spring to me. We'll talk about the business of digital marketing, but what design did you study? Because design is also super broad.
Yeah, sure. So my degree was design technology, so it was kind of product design based.
Okay.
But where I spent pretty much all my time was in the portfolios that needed to be produced to back your product that you designed.
Yeah.
And I think, again, going back from there, I have memories of recording mixtapes, cassette tapes, and designing the covers for them on like Microsoft Paint or something like that, printing them out, cutting them, even designing barcodes to go on it, trying to make it look as legit as possible. And I think we're talking about when I was about 12 or 13. Then. So I've just always, and I was in bands, and the first thing that I loved to do when I started a band was to design the logo. And so design was always just what I was drawn to. No matter what I was doing, it was almost like, well, where can I find the design element to get stuck into? And that was what kept me interested.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like the interest in design.
Yeah. neither of my parents are designers, but on my dad's side, my cousins, there's four of them, and I always remember going to their place in the summer holidays and just seeing incredible artwork. They were all incredibly talented. One of them still, I don't know if whittles is the right word, but he makes smoking pipes, and they're beautifully engraved. Like it looks like an 18th century ship, but it's a smoking pipe, and it's all done by hand. And I remember, I think it was his or maybe the older one's bedroom. All the walls were painted in like a fantasy landscape, and he'd done that himself. So I was always inspired by that, but that's such a small part. I don't know. I guess it's just ingrained in me. I think it was more nature than it was nurture.
Yeah. Interesting. Like how you get to that point. I always have an interest in other people's bits from being a kid. So you did various things before your agency, because you started your agency in 2007. So we're similar age.
Yeah.
So you're around 98, 99.
I first set up so I'm trying to figure out where best to run from. We maybe kind of collate it all at the end, but like if we go to university, whilst I was at university, I started skateboarding when I was 9, and really got into it a lot when I was in my early 20s. That was my main driver, and I started working for a company as a sales agent, a clothing company, 360 Clothing. They still exist today, and they primarily did jeans and T-shirts. And when I started working for them, there was the crossover period between the really, really big baggy jeans, big Osiris D3 shoes, into it suddenly kind of went from kind of hip hop influence to rock influence. And so jeans were really turning into like drain pipes and all that. And there was no one working for them at the time overseeing the design side of things. So they were seeing sales slide because they were still providing these big baggy jeans. They kind of come into existence before H&M. And so you either had the American brands that at the time you were spending 65, 70 pounds on a pair of jeans that was considered expensive, or you could buy 360 that looked exactly the same for 30 pounds. So that was they were doing that before H&M. They were able to provide cheaper jeans. I think the majority of it was made over in Turkey. Then H&M came in, things changed, but nevertheless, I think the main thing was that they weren't providing a product that met the demands of the audience anymore. So Naz, the guy who runs it, was super open to ideas, and I was like, well, look, I love design. Could I potentially get involved with this? And he was like, yeah, for sure, let's go. So I remember getting a pair of jeans, sending a pair of jeans over, and I was like, this is the basic cut that we're going for, but change this, change that, change the other. And they were jeans that I'd been wearing and skating in for ages. So, and I always kept my wallet in my back pocket. So then sat on the skateboard over a year or whatever, it wore. You could see where my wallet had sat in the back pocket. We got these jeans back, and I don't think we even went through a sampling process. It was just like, make jeans like this. We'll have 300 of them. And they came in, and they'd even, sandblasted or laser etched where my wallet had sat in the back pocket. So there was that, and I did T-shirts, but it was the T-shirts were cut and sew. I don't think I oversaw the shape of them or anything. It was more the design side of things. So there was that, and before then, I have memories of when I was like 9 or 10, and I think my folks have probably got the photos to prove this as well, which didn't always go well. But I was customizing my own clothes, like turning trousers into shorts, like putting patches on them and whatever. Like it was always an interest of mine. And I'll always say I've never been particularly interested in fashion, but in terms of clothes and how they make you feel, and how they can make you feel like you're part of something bigger than you, or something small like a tribe or whatever. It's how you kind of fit in and demonstrate to the world who you are. And that's always really interested me. But yeah, so it was from doing the designs with 360. Then I finished off my degree, and when I finished that, I was sending out CVs trying to get design work, and we were, I mean, in the UK, I don't know if it was exactly in a recession, but it was around about that time, 2003, 2004. Things were not great. It wasn't easy to find. It's never easy to find a job as a graduate, but let alone then was not easy. So I kind of started doing freelance work, and I did 6 months at a design agency in Nottingham. And whilst I was doing that, I was also, because I was only doing that 2 or 3 days a week, so the rest of the time I was filling it with creating. It was called Shamal. It was a surf brand that a friend of mine and myself had kind of started to develop. And Shamal is a northwesterly wind in the Middle East. It's and it brings change with it. And so the idea was this was a surf brand that would be rooted in sustainability. You know, again, we're talking 2003, 2004. But as I know now, you need a decent amount of money behind you. You can do all the designs, but to bring it to life, you need a decent amount of money. So that never actually came to fruition. But all the way through, clothing has always been an interest and been a way to communicate my design interests.
Yeah. So what we haven't mentioned is Bahrain.
Yeah,
sure. We just touched on the Middle East, but I think that's seeing what you're doing now, and then the conversations that we've had. I mean, I never knew Bahrain was an island, so that tickled me. But you were born in Bahrain, right?
I was, and go on, sorry.
And then you went back to Bahrain because there's Nottingham in the middle.
I did. Yeah, that's right. So I was born out there. My dad worked for Gulf Air, who were based over there. So I was born over there and educated until I was 16. Always came back to the UK for Easter holidays, summer holidays, especially the summer, because it gets to near enough 50 degrees centigrade and about 98% humidity. And we'll get back to that. But as an adult living there, like, you know, and running my own business, I didn't have the opportunity to escape over the summer. And it's pretty unbearable because of it being a tiny island as well. There's nowhere to escape to unless you get on a plane. There's nowhere to escape to. And it's funny because you say, you know, you didn't even know that it was an island. Not many people knew about Bahrain. When I would come back in the summer holidays, they'd be like, especially if I'd say, someone would say, where do you live? And I'd be the Middle East. They'd be like Birmingham. I'm like, no, the Middle East. And it's been in more recent years, obviously with Formula One. Bahrain has a track there, and they've been on the calendar for a while. But it's an interesting island because if you look at it on a map, the dot that kind of denotes a capital city in other countries is most of the time is bigger than the island itself on a map. So it's completely hidden. It's tiny. You can drive from top to bottom in an hour and 20. And across, if the traffic's okay, probably in 45 minutes. You know, it really is a tiny island, but with huge opportunities for the right industry, especially if it's particularly if it's corporate. It's not well set up for if you're looking to do something slightly different, just because the population's so small. But in terms of, because for instance, so I set up. Need to kind of go back. So yes, I was born there, lived there till I was 16. And then when I finished my GCSEs, Dad left Gulf Air, moved back to the UK. And so we all moved back at the same time.
Gotcha.
So then I carried on education here, and went to college. And then I went to college and actually ended up going to college initially in Oakham, near Leicester, and then moved over to Nottingham and went to art school here in Nottingham, and then that led on to going to university at Nottingham Trent. So that was the kind of like the education and employment. Worked for a couple of skate companies and then design agency, and then I would keep going out to Bahrain on holidays because it was an affordable way to take a trip out the country, and it was something I knew as well. And so I could go over it. All I had to pay for really was my ticket and feeding myself when I was out there, because I'd stay with friends. And then in 2003, I'd finished my degree that summer. And then that winter, I went out to Bahrain and met my now wife, Amy, when I was there. Now, she's from Melbourne. And obviously, I'm from the UK. So the first year that we were together, we were doing long distance, and it was an 11-hour time difference, between a 9 and an 11-hour time difference, depending on when in the year it was, which made life really, really tough. But we just, it clicked, and we decided that we would try and make it work. Which, as I say, she's my wife now, so we did make it work. But when she finished university, she came over here and did an exchange between Melbourne University and Nottingham University. And then when her degree came to an end, we were kind of like, well, if I move to Australia, I'm 24 hours away from my family. And if she moves here, she's 24 hours away from her mum, but her dad still lived in Bahrain. And so we thought, I was trying to do the freelance design thing over here, wasn't working out great just because it was very, very difficult. And I thought, well, why don't we go for Bahrain? It's 14 hours to Australia, 7 hours to England, and we know it, and we can give it a shot, and we can do it affordably. So that's exactly what we did. And then we were there. So from 2006, moved back in 2006, officially set up the agency in 2007, and then moved back here in May 2021.
Okay, so a good stint in Bahrain.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say most of my life, larger proportion of my life it was spent in Bahrain than it has been anywhere else.
Yeah. And so what was it like starting a business there?
The agency or Barnfield?
The agency.
The agency. Difficult to say. I mean, they'd opened it up so that expats could, you could set up businesses over there. When I was growing up, you could, but there had to be a 51% Bahraini partner as well. Whereas they made it so that certain businesses, like service-led businesses, could be 100% foreign-owned. And I think that had only started a couple of years before I moved back. So the timing was great to be able to do that. The difficulty is that nobody, because it was new, trying to make it work, people didn't really know how it was supposed to work, even in the government entities and stuff. So the initial setup phase was quite difficult. But because it's small, word of mouth worked in my favor. So I think it probably took a year. I think I got small enough jobs that were small but big enough to kind of sustain me, probably within the first month. And that kind of carried on doing smaller jobs for about 12 months. But I think it was within 12 or 18 months, we were working for the Royal Golf Club, which is the only and the largest kind of 5-star grass 18-hole course over there that was designed by Colin Montgomery. And then that kind of led on to other things. So we ended up working for Porsche, for Audi. And when you're working for the brands over there, because it's a small country, whereas here in Nottingham, if I was working for Porsche, I'd be working for a dealer, whereas I was working for the distributor there. And so they had budgets for marketing that matched being a distributor rather than a dealer. And this is what I talk about, where, the opportunities are there. Everywhere is within close proximity. So probably takes you about 45 minutes to get to anywhere. So I could go from the office out to my client really easily and still get back to do work. Whereas when I think about if I was to be running the agency in London, the whole day is spent with travel just to get to your client. So certain things really worked in my favor with that. And I remember Porsche had a marketing budget because they had to spend a certain percentage of projected sales on marketing. And if they didn't, they would be fined by Porsche headquarters for not spending enough on marketing. And so I think their budget for marketing, which also included launches of cars and events that would take up like £300,000 worth of the budget. Yeah. But the budget was like $1.2 to $1.4 million a year for a country smaller than the Isle of Wight. So,
but I imagine a lot of Porsches are good market for them.
Yeah, true. True. There was at one point, I remember thinking there's probably as many 911s here as there are Ford Focuses in the UK. At one point, you go into a car park and it would just be all Porsches. I think they outsold Audi 4-1
Wow.
in Bahrain, which is all backwards for the rest of the world. But yeah. So lots of opportunity. But where we did struggle. And it's always difficult to say this, because one of the most important things and one of the most valuable things that came out of running my agency was the staff that we had, and the kind of the opportunities that were created through the agency for them. And that was really important to both. Amy and I both worked in the agency.
Okay.
And it was really important to both of us that we created opportunity for people who work for us. We were a small agency at Max. We were 6 people, but then we were supported by freelancers, about 14 other freelancers. But for those 6 people, I never wanted them or my clients to suffer for the fact that we were small. They should benefit from the fact that we were small. So we should provide the same level of service to our clients as if we were a big agency, and we should provide the same opportunities to our employees as if we were a big agency, but do it in a much more kind of like, I struggle to use the word family, because I think businesses use the word family and say, oh, we're like a family, and then expect more out of their employees than they should. Yeah. But I mean, I had a real protective instinct towards the people who work for me. And that's still a really important part of, we were award winning. We did pick up awards, and we were on the surface on paper incredibly successful. We were profitable from the second year, and did very well. But that's what's more important to me, is those relationships that I created with the staff and the opportunities that I created.
Yeah. What were some of the issues that you faced then? I mean, I imagine.
Well, actually, staffing was a difficult one, which is why the staff was so important. But because the country was so small, at one point there was only 2 digital marketing agencies. There was me, and there was one other, like on the other side of the island. And so it's not like, and especially digital being so new, like we started using Facebook on behalf of the Royal Golf Club in late 2007, early 2008. So that's really early days.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you could find people who have loads of experience in social media. So you had to train them up. You had to bring in people for culture fit, and then you would train them up. But there was more work than we could find staff for. Because at that size, if you bring in someone who negatively impacts, who doesn't bring everything they possibly can to their job at the time that they're in there, the negative impact is far greater than just that one person. It affects the morale of everyone. Amy and I then have to step in because we're training, and then we have to step in to do their work as well as our own work. So staffing was a real struggle to find enough staff of the caliber. We were really, really lucky that we found the people that we did.
Out of interest, were they younger than you? Because you would have been like 25, 26, 27.
Yeah, so when I set up the agency, I was, in my head, I was 24. No, it was 81. So I was 25 when I set up the agency. And I saw a picture. I was clearing through a hard drive, and I looked at a picture, my first kind of profile picture, and I'm there in my first suit that I bought, like so ridiculously fresh-faced. And I would always be like, why aren't these people taking me seriously? Yeah. And now I look and I would struggle to take that person seriously, because where is the experience? Where is the knowledge? But I was, again, very thankful because people did. It did take me seriously and did create opportunities. But yeah, sorry. Right. What was the question?
No. The age of your team, because you're training people up, and I say that knowing that you would have been young, and 25, 26, even 30 is young. Even the age we're at is actually young. But when you're starting out, you're then training people.
Well, I mean, I think initially the same guy who I started to set up the surf brand with, he had gone down a route. He'd developed his own website, which was used for, it's like Behance, where you could put up your portfolio, and it was very much at the same time as that. Behance got good funding and carried on through, and Ollie, the guy who I'm talking about, his business Final Crit could have done the same thing, but didn't have the same level of support, but it was very similar. So he'd done that. And then off the back of that, he'd then done a lot of search engine optimization work. So he was working in digital. So when I picked up the job at the Royal Golf Club, it was way bigger than I could handle. Way bigger, because I was just one person. And it was for the whole thing. And it was the setup, like doing all their brochures, all their billboards, all their digital, their website, the whole thing. So it was huge. So I had to bring someone on to work for me. And Ollie came out from England and started working for me. So there was at least two of us at that point, and he was the same age.
Okay. And then, but he brought his own kind of skill set. So the training.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, at that point, as I say, it was the two of us working out of a bedroom in my home. And then another guy started working for us as well. Like probably a year later. So I'd been running the agency for 3 years at that point. And I brought on my third member of staff. And at that point, I was like, okay, I can't be running this out of home anymore because it just doesn't work. So got an office out there. But yeah, so then Ollie actually moved on. And then, everyone was younger by probably, I think by that time I was probably 32, 30.
Yeah.
And most of them were, 25, 26. So not significantly younger.
But still younger in the scheme of things, looking back at the picture of you as your founder, your first profile picture, going, wow, look at that. He isn't Mark young.
Yeah.
They were also really young, aren't they? And
Yeah. And I mean, it's a young industry as well, digital, there's plenty of people now who are seasoned professionals and understand digital and can integrate it. But at that stage, it was so new. You had to have a different way of looking at the world to approach digital in a way that wasn't just placing like constant billboard ads up on someone's Facebook feed. So it needed young people.
Which is prescient in itself, because a lot of conversations I have, and you might have the same with people our age, like the gripes of their industry, they feel they're too old for doing what they're doing because the younger generation are kind of coming thick and fast behind you.
I mean, I think it's any industry, isn't it? Especially like if you look at social and you look at the clothing brands of today, they are using social in a different way to the way that I'm able to use it.
Yeah.
Because, and just in that natural way. Like, I think if you've grown up, either you think about the way parents are just kind of pointing their cameras at their kids or their phones at their kids throughout their entire childhood, and also just having a phone. I am of that generation. I think they call it Zennials, which is Gen X and in between Gen X and Millennials. And it's the years that the original Star Wars movies came out. So I was born in 81. And so I had an analog childhood and then kind of a digital later teen and onwards. I mean, I didn't get my first little Nokia phone until I was working for myself, working for myself, but working until I was at 18.
Yes. Yeah. Like it's different, but you come with experience, don't you? At that now.
Yeah.
Which then, and neither is more or less valid. I think that's.
I think ignorance is really important. In its way, if you're aware of your ignorance, and can accept help from other people, I think it's really important, because I think it means you do things in different ways, and you're not stuck to the rules, and so that can create different results, really exciting and interesting results.
Yeah. Jumping forward to now, one thing that you just said was you started it working from home. Your mate Ollie came over from England, and you were still working from home. And then you're like, we need to get the space now because
Yeah.
we need to grow. Easy to do when you're 25, 26. Feels really, and it feels like what you're supposed to do when you're starting something out. The older
true.
you get, you like a few more comforts. How do you feel about doing that? Because I think that's a necessary part of starting.
Yeah.
To start really small, but it's harder. Necessarily small and uncomfortable because there's not enough space. Like you're kind of compromising certain things, but you're driven to get through that stage.
Yeah.
That can be a real barrier starting now.
I think I'm very comfortable with the idea of being frugal and starting in a way that, and when it's just being sensible, like, does it make sense to be throwing loads of money at, a studio space in London for Barnfield now? No. It makes zero sense at all. I'd much rather put the money into the product or into the development side of things. So you get known for the right product first. And I think, again, when you're younger, you'll do things because you're like, well, that's what I've seen. And that's what you should do. But it doesn't mean it's the best end result. Yeah.
But do you find it feels on the quiet days that it's uncomfortable? Or does the should creep in?
No.
No.
And the reason is because the whole reason I shut down my agency was because, and this always doesn't sound how I would like it to sound, but basically we were victims of our own success. I think the main thing is I had never identified how much enough was. And I don't particularly mean enough money for me personally, but how much money needs to be coming into the business to sustain the business so that when I brought on an employee, I wouldn't have to let them go 3 months later because we'd lost a client. I was always driven to create stability. And having not defined how much enough was, I just worked and worked and worked and worked. It didn't matter. We would go away on holiday. And that's the other thing that's worth noting is, like, because Amy and I were both working in the agency, if the both of us went on holiday, there's 2 members of senior staff taken out of that business. Yeah. So all we ended up doing, really, we would be like, we need to take a break. We've got to get out of here. So we'd pay the money, go on holiday, and then work really hard from our mobile phones instead of in front of our computers at the office. It just in a different location and struggling to make it work because you feel like you should be on holiday and should be enjoying yourself. We just never stopped, and that ended up leading to, once I'd been running the agency for about 10 years, I ended up strapped up to a heart rate monitor because I was having heart palpitations and anxiety attacks, stomach ulcers, stress headaches, kidney stones. All these things were just coming together because my body was just going, enough. You cannot keep this. You cannot sustain this level of work. And so that's what made me bring the agency to a close. And so I think I'm so aware of that running Barnfield. If a day's quiet, I take it, and I kind of take it with both hands and know that then I'll get a sample back and I need to react fast and I need to make things happen. And so on the quiet days, I don't see that as a bad thing at all.
Ever? Or are you kind of resolved in
sometimes.
That?
Sometimes if things haven't been moving forwards at a pace that you want them to, and you're not getting that external input, and you're just like, I haven't heard back from anyone for 2 weeks. And I know that I need to, I'm working on a peacoat, for example. Like, I know I'm going to need to get that launched out into into pre-orders by October to be able to deliver in the winter. Because otherwise I'm going to be delivering a peacoat in the summer, so no one's going to want it. So, you do have deadlines and you do have to drive things forwards. And that's where that's when the quiet does affect me, but only in those moments.
Yeah. And I'm interested because they're sort of similar. Starting a business, running a business, it can be pretty draining where, all of those things.
Work.
And then
it's hard work. Yeah. I mean, I think that Go on, sorry.
Oh, but then there's I certainly had a feeling of failing a bit, and then
Okay.
managing, kind of not being able to do it. Do you ever have that?
Did I ever feel like a failure? I would have definitely had my moments of feeling that. And I think that it took me a long time to disassociate myself from the agency. I think for a long time, I was able to be like, in meeting people, obviously I wouldn't say this, but the thought process was like, hi, I'm Mark, and I run a successful digital marketing agency. So it was kind of came as part and parcel of who I was. So when I then took that away, I felt very adrift for a long time. And it took me, although I think that's also what drove me to jump straight back into design. Like as soon as I brought the agency to a close, I think it was a couple of weeks of kind of going, okay, can kind of feel a sense of balance coming back. But in no way was I over what had gone on. I mean, I remember walking back into I kept on the office for another 6 months after I closed the agency down for it, because I just couldn't face going back in there. And then when I did, it felt like PTSD. I honestly felt like the walls closing in on me like a tunnel, because of just like the stress, and I think like it was it took removing myself from that situation to be able to look back in on it and realize how bad it was. I mean, yeah, if you end up strapped up to a heart rate monitor for 48 hours because there's cardiac stuff going on, which is then attributable to stress, then you're obviously dealing with a lot of stress. So I don't know if I ever felt like a failure, because I was kind of like that. It was the right decision. But again, it probably took me a while to come around to all of it. It's hard to tell now in hindsight whether I felt that. And I think because it had been financially successful and has set me up for now, I think that gave me that buffer where I was just like, well, I'm okay. Like, I don't need to worry about money. I can take my time. And I think that if I had been forced to go into the job market or something like that and been rebuffed from interview after interview because I was the founder of an agency, and then what would I be going in to be doing? Like someone said to me once, in fact, because during the Arab Spring, everything kicked off in Bahrain as well. There were huge protests, and Amy and I actually she was working for an insurance brokerage firm, and they evacuated us out to England because it really got quite sketchy at one point. The military came over from Saudi. It was pretty scary at that time. And so we got evacuated out, and I was thinking, well, what am I going to do if everything that I've been working towards with my agency, if I have to bring that to a close, if Bahrain isn't viable anymore? And so I spoke to a couple of guys who I knew were in the industry, and they found it very tough and one of them was very honest with me, and he was like, the difficulty is as a business owner or as an agency owner, you have built many, many, many like tent poles about a foot high, but what you need to be doing in the employment world is to be developing a tent pole that is 12 foot high. Is much more specific. And so I think I would have really struggled to have found a job that I didn't feel like I was stepping backwards to do. And so I think that would have cemented those feelings, but because I didn't have that situation. I've had moments along the way with Barnfield where I've felt like a failure, because as we've talked about before, you can look in on other people's businesses and go, wow, how come it only took them 12 months to go from 0 to 350,000 followers on Instagram and seemingly have a really slick business? And it took me 4 years to go from 0 to 5,000 followers and launch a single jacket. Those things you can tell yourself that you've learned a lot and it's really important and you've been setting the foundations, but there are still moments definitely where I can be like, I should have been so much further along with this part of my journey than I am now at this stage in my life.
Yeah. Well, I think the tempo analogy is quite interesting. Or just that focusing on one thing. Certainly, my experience was having that feeling of not having that tempo. I can do all these things, but then where do you go? How do you fit in? How do you take direction from someone when you've kind of always given direction? And conversely, for those who have built a high tempo, that's like a lot of experience in one thing.
Yeah.
But then the other, you need different tempos then.
It depends
It
depends on your circumstances. COVID was the best example. Would he have been giving me the same advice? You think about a pilot, for instance. They have a very tall tent pole in a very specific area. And so then when COVID hit, you had pilots being delivery guys and girls. So, things have adjusted again now. But in that moment, I bet they wished they had a broad spectrum of knowledge and experience and could go, right, where are my transferable skills? Okay, this isn't working out now, but wow, like people are on furlough. They're not going away on holiday, so they've got more disposable cash and things can be delivered. What can I be making and selling? And leveraging that. So, people with a broader skill set would have been able to leverage that at the time.
Yeah. I guess the joining, the connector for us two is founders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Irrespective of the thing that we're doing. And I think there's affinity with anyone that starts something that you only have with other people that start something.
It's very difficult when you speak to someone who has been in full-time employment their entire lives. Like I think I'm really fortunate that my parents are very understanding. Like it can very easily drive a wedge between you and your family if they don't get what you're doing day in, day out. And there's no reason for my parents to understand. My dad was in full-time employment. Mum raised us and was an aerobics instructor, very good at that. But, they weren't entrepreneurs. They weren't looking to found their own businesses. So, and it can be tough when you speak to someone who is in full-time employment because there's just no way of understanding.
Yeah.
You do this job, but then you also had to do all of these jobs as well. Yes, I'm designing clothes and doing the marketing and doing the web design and doing the accounting and doing the project management. So, but it works well for me. It works well for me because I like to have different interests. It keeps me interested.
Yeah. I realized this morning that all the things that I've kind of been drawn to are all very lonely.
Okay. Interesting.
Or high consequence, individual high consequence things. And I don't know what that is. Because to go and do something, maybe it's just a personality trait, but then it's like, I want to start my own business.
Yeah.
I remember my dad saying, going for a walk with my dad before I started Album. And he was like, it is lonely. And all of those things. And I was like, yeah. But again, I don't always had it.
I don't think you realize when you're that age though either, do you? But it's one of the things like I was saying, like, like being so driven and feeling so much joy from the employees that I had and creating that environment. One of the first things that I did with Barnfield was to create community. And that's why I was drawn towards the motorbikes and rebuilding motorbikes and that side of things. And then that created community around me, whether they were involved in the business or not. it was still community.
So, segue, Barnfield,
Yeah.
digital marketing agency.
Yeah.
You know, bringing that to a natural conclusion or a resting point.
Yeah.
Because you never forget the things that you've done, and that gave you valuable experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
Starting something else again.
Yeah.
How did you go, wake up one morning and go,
I'm going to do this.
I'm going to do Barnfield. Amy, I'm going to do Barnfield.
Well, yeah, I guess I didn't. I mean, as I said, so when I brought the agency to a close, there was this I'd been working 24/7 on it for 10, I think it was more like 11 or 12 years by the time we actually brought it to a close. And then so suddenly there was this enormous hole from going from like every waking hour thinking about this to just being like almost like the brakes being hit and you're just flung out the car and you'd say, well, what's going on now? Like everything has changed. Everything around me has changed.
Yes.
And I don't even know what I do with my days. And so I essentially went back to my roots, having been involved in clothing businesses before. And that whole idea of design and digital marketing being drawn together by a clothing brand. So I started to develop what I called Tailor at the time, which was an athleisure wear brand. And the idea was that it was well cut t-shirts, hoodies, sweatpants that was really limited in terms of the branding, because I felt that you're working seriously hard in the gym to look a certain way, and what you're wearing should be more about you than it should be about the brand.
Okay.
So minimal branding, sustainable fabrics in terms of t-shirts. I was sampling up t-shirts that were made out of wool, which seemed bizarre initially before I started looking into it. It seemed bizarre to be using wool for a t-shirt that you're going to be working out in. But of course, it's breathable. It's naturally antibacterial.
Yeah.
It's biodegradable.
Wicking,
so it's
all of that stuff.
Yeah, great fabric, and so much better than polyester. Essentially wrapping yourself in plastic. So again, that was the idea. The sustainability side of things came from the fact of like you're taking care of your health by going to the gym. So why would you wrap yourself in plastic? So use natural fabrics. And then that kind of went backwards to using if it's wool, great. If it's cotton, it should be organic cotton. If it's from the point of view of the farmers who are having to use the pesticides and fertilizers and all that sort of stuff, their health is just as important as your health in the gym. They shouldn't have to suffer, getting all sorts of horrible cancers so that you can wear your cheap cotton goods. So there was a lot of focus on that. And I spent a few thousand on that and spent about 18 months developing it. And I was able to do that in Bahrain because there's lots of tailors in Bahrain. They didn't really get what I was trying to do, but it was fine. They had the skill set to be able to put together what I wanted. And I actually got some really nice pieces that I've still got together from that. But I'd been working on that for about 18 months, and I came back to the UK over the summer to get away from the heat. And I was staying with my parents at the time.
Right.
And I think because I was doing this in Bahrain, I wasn't being the Instagram algorithm was very local, and it wasn't exposing me to the fact that there were other brands doing very similar stuff. Gymshark Gymshark isn't the same in terms of the sustainable fabrics and the minimal branding and stuff, but like those athleisure brands were really gaining a lot of momentum. And so when I came back to England, then Instagram, the algorithm kind of updated to realize that I was here. I was suddenly getting just ad after ad after ad for another athleisure brand. And I was like, how am I unique? How am I?
Yes.
And looking at it and realizing that the only way forwards really to get it was to use influencer marketing. And influencer marketing, I had an issue with then. I still have an issue with now. because
Okay.
when I was involved in skateboarding, like the companies that we worked with, whether it was 360 Clothing, and I worked for Adio Shoes as well, and anyone who skated around the early 2000s would know Adio because of Bam Margera, Tony Hawk, and all those guys. But you always had sponsored teams, so they would be wearing your shoes or your clothes, but they'd be wearing them for the duration of a contract, and that might be 12 months. They wouldn't be telling the world how amazing this shoe was one day, and then being sent another pair of shoes from a competing brand and being like, actually, this is amazing. And it just felt so inauthentic. And I think that really, those two things really shook me. And I was like, how am I going to make it different? And then I started looking into it and feeling all sorts of negativity around, well, I'm creating this brand which is quote unquote sustainable, but how long do you wear a t-shirt for? At most you may be, I say this, I'm actually still wearing the CrossFit t-shirts that I was wearing in Bahrain from 5 or 6 years ago. I'm still wearing them because I don't like to let go of that sort of stuff. But the majority of people will wear a t-shirt for a year maximum before they chuck it away and get on with something else. Dark time, because I'd spent money and time on it. I was like, this is the next thing. I've run my agency. That's come to a close. Probably, again, going back to, like, did I ever feel like a failure? What stopped me from feeling like a failure was like, no, I'm onto this. This is what I'm doing now. This is the next thing. This is what's sustaining me. This is cool. This is interesting. And suddenly, again, the brakes being slammed on and just being like, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. I don't want to go back to running the agency. I can't. I physically can't. I had PTSD going back into the office. So what do I do? And I was kind of like, I am locking myself away until I figure this out. And I remember myself, like, because my parents have got like a shed in the back garden. I put a table in there, and I just went out there every day. And I was like, I'm not getting up until I've figured out what I'm going to do. I don't know whether that was sensible or not, but I do remember towards the end of that week walking back into my folks' house and seeing a picture of my great-grandfather in his First World War uniform just before he shipped out in like 1915. And that photo has been, I've been aware of that photo throughout my entire life. But it was something in that moment, maybe because it was emotional and I wasn't sure what I was doing and I was in flux. Something hit me and I was like, there's something here.
Yep.
And that was when I started to look into uniform and jackets, because I was thinking, this is the kind of the throwaway nature of t-shirts. How can I still think I don't want to throw away this time that I've spent looking into clothing and manufacturing and production. I don't want to throw away that knowledge and just jump into something completely different. There's something here, like a jacket. I had a reefer jacket of my dad's that I've seen a picture of him wearing, the month after he and my mum got married, and still got it. So there was, that started to click and be like, well, what if I was to create something that had more longevity to it? Still clothing, but something that had longevity to it. And that snowballed, because then I started looking on Pinterest at like military uniforms, and the first picture that just kept coming up was this picture of a British Army officer, and he's sat astride a motorbike, and he's speaking to a guy leant on two canes, and they both got massive smiles on their face. And you're like, what's the story there? And the story was that the person on the bike was T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, and he's speaking to a guy called George Brough. And George Brough made motorbikes under the name of Brough Superior, and they were known as kind of like the Rolls Royce of motorbikes at the time. And T. Lawrence had 7 of them. He had his 8th on order when he crashed and died. But at the same time, mate and I were looking at reconditioning motorbikes. And at the time I was in Nottingham. Brough Superior was in Nottingham. T. Lawrence made his name in Saudi Arabia, probably about 20 miles away from where I was had been living in Bahrain. So there was just all these kind of little connections that were just kind of saying, this is it. There's something here. There's something to look into. There's something that makes sense.
So that, feels like the Middle East or the Bahrain is important. So, and we'll get to that in a bit. So you locked your way in the shed.
Yeah.
You came up with this idea, and like you say, time will tell if it's a success. It'll be the best time you've locked your way yourself into a shed, and that'll be the secret, won't it? It'll be to lock yourself into a shed.
Always, just if you're struggling, lock yourself in a shed. You'll be much better off.
And where are you now?
Well, so
from having that idea,
So
because I think it does take time.
It does, and from then, so that was the summer of 2018. I then came back to England. No, summer of 2019. Sorry, because then I came back to England, mid-January through to mid-February 2020, with the idea of buying a motorbike that needed work and working for a month with a mate of mine to bring it back to life and see, just as a tester, do I want to live back in England? Can I survive through a winter, having lived in the sunshine for so many years? Is that really going to affect me? Is this something that I want to do? Because the idea was, and I talk about community, the idea was to vlog about the development of the motorbike and use that as the kind of fly on the wall intro to the founder and what I was doing to create a community around that, and then to sell clothing into there. Because I think I've talked about before about how the idea with Barnfield, even there was, I was inspired by these jackets, but there was an interim time where I'd been doing the t-shirts and all that. And so for a time there, the idea was that Barnfield would be a British competitor to Deus Ex Machina. And so it'd be big logos, very bike orientated. And so the bike community would then work with that. I have since, to a degree, moved away from that. But where I'm at now is that in May 2023, I finally launched for pre-order my first jacket, which was very much inspired by my great-grandfather's military World War I uniform, stiff collar, standard full collar, more kind of dress uniform than fatigues. And there was so much that went into that. The whole lining was covered in bespoke artwork and all sorts of stories that go on with that. I made it way more complex than I needed to, which is why amongst other reasons why it took me from founding the business, on Company's House, January 2020, to launching my first jacket after 7 samples, 7 prototypes in May 2023. So I opened up pre-orders, and I only had enough fabric to be able to sell 50 jackets, because the fabric mill that I was working with in France, because of cotton prices going up so significantly, they actually paused all their production. But my samples had been made using their fabric. So the last thing I wanted to do when I was ready to pull the trigger and open up pre-orders was to have to do another sample in another fabric. But they said, we've paused all production, but we have 100 meters left. It was just over 100 meters. So I was like, I'll take it. Just send it to me. And then that allowed me to then open up with 50 jackets for pre-order. And they sold out within 36 hours, all of those pre-orders, which was incredible. And that was all through building in public and then communicating via email about what was going on and keeping people in on the journey. Then, so I was supposed to get them done. There was May, June, July, August. We're supposed to be delivery in September. But as we know, things don't go according to plan with clothing manufacturing. And so it wasn't until mid-October that I delivered that jacket. And then since then, I've also thrown everything up in the air. I'm not working with the same people anymore. I've had to find new factories. And so I'm now, so we're August 2024, and I've just got my second sample back for my next jacket. So yeah, things are slow.
Process of constant iteration.
Yeah.
And reiteration. Yeah. The cotton price part's interesting because that was post-pandemic. The prices just went astronomical.
Post-pandemic, just as Ukraine was, Russia-Ukraine was happening, because there's a lot of cotton comes from Ukraine as well.
Yeah. Things that you can't foresee.
No. And logistics as well. Suddenly the cost of shipping everything went through the roof. Everything went through the roof. And like the real story here is that supplier of it was an organic cotton gabardine. That supplier, they still haven't come back online, and so that's really that's that business. Maybe they'll come back, but that's that business gone, and those jobs gone. I was very lucky that I was able to make something happen, but for them, it's a real shame.
I think those I don't have much experience of starting other businesses, but making clothing in particular always seems quite precarious between idea and realization. Because, like you say, the mill goes bust or closes or discontinues.
Yeah.
And you're constantly like riding this. Well, you're not even riding. You're just being taken on this body of water.
Yeah. And I felt like from between selling out with the pre-orders in May to delivering in October, I just felt like I was doing everything by the seat of my pants, and just every day being like, I've just got to hope that this doesn't go wrong. I've just got to hope that this doesn't go wrong. And everything that did go wrong, I was able to overcome. But the biggest thing was that I was working with one person to do the pattern making, the grading, the cutting, the stitching, the full everything. Now, she's incredible. What she was able to do was incredible. And she's only just in Leicester, so it was only 45 minutes drive away from me. I was able to stay on top of things, and so it was really helpful for me.
Yeah.
But I couldn't see that as being sustainable, because, of course, if she was ill or her wrists, because that jacket was 350 GSM, like the cotton. So she ended up carpal tunnel from doing 50 jackets for me, which obviously I felt bad about, but also can look at it and be like, well, that's not sustainable for her. It's not sustainable for me. And so that's why I've changed things around.
Yes. Carpal tunnel. That's not.
But just you feel like there's just so many individual parts, which is so different to when I was running my agency. Because really, all I needed was my computer and me. You could cut it all the way back down to that, just my computer and me, and a mobile to be able to communicate with my clients. And then you look at clothing.
Did that surprise you?
But only because of ignorance. Because now I look at it and I'm, of course, like, the fabric comes from one place, the buttons come from another. If you're doing, the printed lining came from one place, the wadding that made up the quilting came from somewhere else. Then I was getting it quilted at another place.
Yeah.
There was even the keyhole buttons, just the buttonholes were done elsewhere. So there were so many individual pieces of that puzzle to make it actually happen. When I look back on it now, I don't think it's over dramatic to say it was a miracle that it actually happened and that the customers were happy.
Yeah, I think a miracle goes through my mind, because I think it is. All of those stars have to align.
Yeah.
And what's the level you are comfortable with having some stars not align, and it's good enough to move it forward, because it could.
I'd say the only star that didn't align that I was willing to accept was time, because I stayed in touch with each of my customers. I sent a weekly or bi-weekly email, at least updating them. And no one at any point said, right, that's it, I'm done. I want my money back. And they'd given me their money in May, and it wasn't until October that I delivered. But by staying in touch, by communicating, by being transparent, they were all just really supportive. And so that was the only thing that I let slip was I say let slip, that I allowed to move was time, because I was like, I'm not going to cut corners. For instance, the quilters, when I had the fabric printed up, and then I took it to the quilters, and then I went to go visit to take photos and video whilst it was happening. And whilst it was happening, I was like, there's a layer missing, because it should be the cotton, the printed cotton, then a layer of what's called of non-woven membrane. Then you have the wool, and then another scrim. So that, to stop the migration of fibers through it. Now, I had been really clear in my email, this is what needs to happen, and I referred back to it, and it was there, but they hadn't done it, and it was halfway through the fabric that I had bought at a specific length to be able to fulfill those orders. So I had to reorder the quilting, the wadding, and I had to reorder the printed lining. So that put 6 weeks onto it. But it was either
cost of that.
It was either that, I covered it. Because the quilting factory, they're too small to suck up. That would have been £450 that they had to pay me for, to replace half of the fabric. So, and they weren't charging me that to do the quilting. So they literally couldn't. And so it's that situation where you have that partnership in place, where you're like, well, do I go really hard and be like, you need to cover the cost of this, and then lose that relationship? Or do you suck up the costs to keep the relationship? And maybe there was a middle ground, but I was so busy with sorting everything else out that I never kind of revisited that. And so for me, it was, I sucked up the cost. And that's why I say, like, that first run of jackets, that cost me. I certainly didn't make any money out of it, but I learned a huge amount, and I got testimonials out the back of it, and the confidence that came from delivering a product that I promised.
Yeah. Just a couple of things have sprung to mind, which I want to write down because we'll return to them. Relationships, standards, understanding, and planning have come out of our conversations. So I just want to write that.
Yeah.
Because I think they're like these soft things, soft factors that are they're easy to forget in the entrepreneurial, linear, Excel, binary, hardcore, get it done. All of those things come into play, and you're like, because on the surface, I'm not paying for something that I haven't ordered.
Yeah.
At that point, you have a choice. It's fine. That's one way of doing it, isn't it? It's fine. We'll just continue. Next time, don't do it again. But you know that there's a scrim missing.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. So if anything happens down the line, and you're like, if we'd done that.
Well, and I think this is it. I knew that if anything, if those fibers did migrate, if I was like, oh, okay, sod it, just carry on. I've got to stick to this deadline. We'll cut the corner, and the end product will be the thing that's affected. No one's going to go to the quilting factory and be like, this is ridiculous. They're going to come back to me, and it's my brand that then gets affected. So that's why I was like, no, it's far more important at this stage to set the tone, and so that people know they can immediately trust Barnfield, because you don't buy anything from people you don't trust. And so trust to me is the most important factor across the board.
Yeah. That's another thing that we will talk to again. This list is getting bigger, but the trust erodes as well, doesn't it, over time?
Yeah.
I guess if you let it, and at what point, and this is a rhetorical question, at what point do you move on and say end of relationship?
I think you feel it. You feel it in your stomach. You know you know, like, you know, you don't want to pick up the phone to that supplier because you're probably going to hear something you don't want to hear. And once it gets to that stage, I think that's when you have to call it quits. You know, like maybe it's keep the relationship going until you get that job done, but you feel it when the relationships come to an end. I think you naturally feel it.
Yeah. But that comes over time. That's an experiential thing.
Yeah, I guess
you
so.
Probably got there through experience.
Yeah,
rather than in the early days. You keep on going in that. Oh, one day.
Yeah, I guess because you don't realize that there's other ways of doing it, you know, and you just have that end goal in mind, and it's through experience that you realize. Well, again, we're talking about the relationships. If I push really hard, like Agnes ended up with. Agnes was the lady in Leicester who did the work. She ended up with carpal tunnel, so it's not like she was messing around. It's not like it wasn't trying to deliver. You know, and if I'd been really hard about missing deadlines, well, it wouldn't have benefited anyone. Again, maybe the end user, but that's where I see it as my responsibility. It's my responsibility to protect. I have to be in that middle ground. So I'm protecting the suppliers, the people doing the work, and taking it on board on me and taking the responsibility and saying, listen, guys, you know, it's going to take another couple of weeks to get beyond this point. If you would like to have a refund, please do let me know. And providing those options. And then if that was the case, you know, if they'd all asked for refunds, I'd have definitely had to dig into a lot of my personal savings because I'd already spent the money on fabrics, but I was prepared to do that.
Yeah. That's the understanding part as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a word that has come from previous conversations that we've had about the importance of understanding. Because then when you, like you say, you understood, you shared that with your customers and you gave them an option. But when you have an understanding of the situation, it would be not unreasonable. And I don't know what level you know, these jackets are really difficult to make.
Yeah.
You know, literally the person who's doing it is, you know, is she has carpal tunnels, you know, from making these coats because of the quality of the cloth, because of this. It's like, you can have your money back, you know, if you want your money back. But when you understand it, you're like, oh, like they're going through this for me.
Yeah.
Why would I ask for my money back? Because the jacket will be amazing because someone's giving their life force for that jacket that I've bought. That would sound unreasonable. Going, give me my money back. It's rubbish. You know, that's not good enough.
It would sound unreasonable, but I also kind of, I'm with you. But I did also understand as well that someone might be like, well, look, it's going to be summer by the time I get this, you know. But I think there's also, that's the two things. There's one, being transparent in your communication, providing options, and being, you talk about understanding, I think it's empathy, being empathetic on both sides. And so understanding where the other person might come from. And trying to provide options to avoid any issues.
So we sort of have similar. We've got interwoven paths, I guess, in our where we've got to. Yourself with Barnfield, and your experience of it, which I've really enjoyed talking to you because your digital marketing experience has really. Well, they're good conversations to share pains and struggles. Of creating something and building something, having already built something successful, and then your knowledge is valuable to me, and I think I've provided a reflection in.
Well, I think it's fascinating. I think it's just really interesting how we kind of like fill the gaps. Like I think it's, you know, if you're running a successful clothing brand, you need to have a lot of knowledge in how to produce high quality clothing. And you need to have a lot of knowledge about how to get that in front of people and to resonate with the right people. And I think that we fill those gaps between the two of us but we're in no way competing, which makes this a really interesting discussion each time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I always get a lot from it, and often it feels just like it's a therapeutic conversation for me that clarifies things that I need to do and reminds myself of, chivying on. So what is there anything that you're kind of hoping that listeners get from what we're doing, the conversations that we're having?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it'll be interesting for it's whether you're involved in clothing or whether you have your own brand or would like to have your own brand. I think that the things that we discuss are actually very universal across the board at the moment, whether it's struggling up against Instagram algorithms, or when I say struggling against it, it's struggling against, what you need to do, or maybe this helps you identify what you need to do, and then knowing that other people are struggling to do that, and then maybe that pushes you forward to do it yourself. And I think that there's just so much there's a lot to learn between the two of us in terms of what we bring to the podcast, but it's also just knowing that other people are going through it as well, and kind of the behind the scenes of running a brand. It can all look very glossy from the outside, and you don't really see the struggle.
Yeah, knowing that other people are going through it and being able to hear them or talk to them, I find hugely reassuring and a real, probably the biggest comfort, actually. Misery loves company, but also the other way. Like when it's succeeding, who's there to share that with? Because a lot of people don't like to talk about failures or success because there's kind of,
especially in England, and the English approach to don't talk about success. And I do get that. I know how it works, but I think it's great to have people along with you who can enjoy success, and you can revel in their success as well. But it's success. It's a journey of ups and downs running your own business. And I think that there are ways that you can protect yourself and manage it, but you have to accept that is the case.
Yeah. And also understand what success is. When more people talk about it, you can, because like you said, you didn't really have a gauge on what success would be.
Just keep
and
pushing.
I think you just keep pushing. And I was very much similar, and because success is different things. I read something yesterday that was like, if you don't have to ask someone that you can go for lunch with, like your partner, then you've kind of made it.
You've made it.
Because time is.
Finally. It's so true. But it's also very, very difficult. We've spoken about this before. Like when you've talked about it when you maybe see people from school that you haven't seen for ages or something, or maybe they're not even from school, but they are of a similar age and they've been in the same industry, same career, from when they left university. And on the surface, on paper, they appear far further ahead in the game of life. Maybe they've got the house, they've got the cars, they've got this, they've got the other. And so, it all seems, and the title that is given externally, that's something that you don't get in school. You work hard, you understand things, you get good grades, you behave well, maybe you'll become head boy or head girl or whatever. There are these accolades that are given to you as you go along. In a career, there's progression, greater responsibilities, do well, complete the job well, get a promotion, therefore more money, better title, all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
You might be able to call yourself a founder, as I did in my agency when I was 26, when I set it up. And you've kind of skipped the queue whilst your mates are interns or junior designers or whatever. But no one is giving you that praise. No one's giving you those accolades. You have to see You have to look in and go, yeah, I've learned a lot this year. Or, yes, you have to decide who you are and where you are on the in the pecking order, which again is a strange journey to be on, because we've been brought up in schools that provide external validation. And so you have to decide what that external validation looks like.
Yes. Yeah. Which is, that's part of the challenge, I think.
Yeah.
Being self-sufficient while not being isolated.
Yeah. And I don't know whether it's easier, as like, you could almost call what we're both doing as like midlife startups. I don't know. I just don't know whether it's easier when you have more experience and potentially are more financially stable, to, once you've made that decision to throw in the towel with something and start something different, whether there's those benefits, or whether you're also a little bit kind of shy of it because you know how much work needs to be put in. And you don't have the ignorance. There's, again, talked about it before, the Dunning-Kruger curve. You don't know what you don't know, and then as you start to learn more, you realize how ignorant you are, and you could go through some serious crisis of confidence at that stage. Yeah. And so I don't know. Like when you're older, you do know that you don't know stuff, and so I think that crisis of confidence gets hit faster. But you're backed with more experience and knowledge that you can overcome it. I don't know.
And speaking to that, what I have experienced with speaking to other people that have done it, failed speech marks or succeeded speech marks, is a humility to it, which was to the point earlier about when you started, you were working from home.
Yeah.
Al and I were with Album, just like, I mean, we weren't necessarily working from home. We were in the box room.
Yeah.
In his above his mum's dental surgery,
Sure.
That was head office, which sounds way grander than it was, on the Mansfield Road. But then returning to that, like, and the people that I've met who've gone and done it again, that's just what you do. That's what,
yes.
That's where you return to, because
I think that's really important. It's really important not to look at those moments as starting over. They're another step in the journey. You've got to appreciate everything that you've learned and everything that you've done beforehand, because if you see it as starting again, and I had moments of that when I moved back from Bahrain to Nottingham. It was mid-COVID. We were very, very lucky that we managed to find an apartment, and it was a tiny 2-bed apartment in West Bridgeford. So again, nice area, but tiny. And I was in a tiny little box room, and I had my bed and I had my desk, and I painted the back wall grey. And I can show you pictures of me like modeling some of the first Lawrence prototypes in there, because everything was in there: my bed, my desk, my clothes, a studio light coming from the side. And I had a moment when I was sat there at my computer and I was looking over at my admittedly unmade bed, because I'd just gone out of bed straight onto the computer to do work, and I was like, fuck me, I'm back. I'm back where I was when I was trying to be a freelance designer in England before I moved out to Bahrain. And I had a moment. I'd probably say it was probably like a week or 10 days. Those were dark. Like there was just such a visceral reminder of everything that I had walked away from, because it was so similar. I'd moved back to the same place, and the situation was the same: laptop, desk, bedroom, and it suddenly felt very small, and very amateur. But then I think that then drove me. Like, right, well, you've got to make this work, because you do not want this to be your life. So keep at it, make it work.
Yeah, you go to the start of the adventure again when you don't know what's going to happen. You just got an idea, and you go and.
It's whether it feels like an adventure though at that moment.
Well, that's the thing, and probably that's why I got into climbing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because you're never guaranteed of getting to the top.
Mm-hmm.
So you come back down and you start again. Weather, fitness, all of those things, and I think that's
I tell you what, that's just reminded me of. There was this moment, and it'll come back to like midlife startups or early life startups. When it was my birthday, and we were at a climbing wall in Bahrain, and it was an outdoor climbing wall. And health and safety is not such a big issue, so it's not like you would have had an organizing body going around and checking that climbing wall was safe. And obviously it's outside, been there for a number of years. So like all the harnesses, everything would have been out in the baking sun, and that it kills cars. It tears the paint off cars because it's that savage, because it's quite salty being an island as well. Yes. So you have salt air, salt humidity, and then baking sun. So
and
it's
cold at
brutal.
Night. I imagine.
No,
it's not cold at night.
It just stays baking hot. Like during the summer, it'll maybe get down to about 32.
Oh, wow.
It's savage. It's savage. So it's really brutal on anything that's left outside. I hadn't thought about this, though. Put on the harness, get going. Yeah, this is great fun. It's my birthday. Then, like, who can get up there the fastest? So on my first run, I'm like, just going up as fast as I possibly can. Get 3/4 of the way up and go, I didn't check the harness. I didn't check the safety rope. I could have just climbed up a couple of feet, jumped off, put my weight on it to see that it was there. So it's 3/4 of the way up before I realized that. And at that point, I'd flown up. And it wasn't like the next quarter of that climbing wall was any more difficult, but I was so tense.
Yeah.
And so panicked. The fear got to me. And suddenly I slowed down. And that the last quarter took twice as long as it took me to do the first 3 quarters. And I thought when I came down, I was like, isn't that an interesting kind of insight into everything? And that's the kind of, when you start a business with no knowledge, straight out of university or whatever, you're just doing it. Whereas when you do it later, you have that experience which hits you 3/4 of the way up.
Yeah.
And you've got to stop being defensive. Because again, like that tied in with, I did jiu-jitsu for 6 years. And when I was, you only have white, blue, purple, brown, black belt. So there's only 5 belts. When I was a blue belt, just before I got my purple belt, I'll talk about that as like the best time in jiu-jitsu. I absolutely loved it because I had some understanding of what I was doing. Been doing it for about 4 or 5 years. So I had some understanding of what I was doing. And I played. I rarely got defensive because it didn't matter if I got beaten. It didn't matter because it's just like there wasn't any expectations there. And then as soon as I got my purple belt, my skill set hadn't changed between one day to the next. But the target or what I felt was a target on my back, or the expectations of what I should be able to do and who should and shouldn't beat me as a purple belt, totally changed. So I just locked down. And my jiu-jitsu became incredibly defensive, incredibly stayed, easy to see what I was going to do. And everything from there was downhill. I ended up damaging my meniscus, which then kind of pulled me out of it. But I would have stopped anyway because I lost all the fun because I got so defensive because of fear again. And so I think fear is the greatest enemy of any startup.
Yeah. And you need courage and encouragement, which we've talked about before, and we'll get to again. But those.
Well, which is again, you say, like, what do I hope people would get out of this podcast is encouragement as well, through that shared experience.
Yeah, nice, very, very important. Okay, so we're off.
All right, let's call it quits, and we'll catch up for our normal catch up in a week's time.
Yes, lovely.
All right, I'll catch you then.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers, guys. Bye bye.